Okay, great. So my name's Hannah Knox, and I'm the director of the Centre for Digital Anthropology at UCL. And so I'm chairing and hosting this event today in this role as the director of the centre. And so I'm really delighted to welcome you to this book launch event. And I think it's one of many events that we'll be running this year and into the future. Just briefly, the Centre for Digital Anthropology is based in the UCL Anthropology department, and it's a centre that brings together researchers who are working on a really wide range of topics around the question of the relationship between human cultures and digital technologies. So today we're going to hear about smartphones and smart aging, but we've also got people at the centre working on things like archiving and collections, on digital activism, coding and coders, data and environmental perception, algorithms and the state, the digitalization of work. So lots and lots of different topics. So as Director Centre, I'm really happy to be able to welcome you here today and to chair the launch event. So just a few words on the structure of the event today. We're going to start with 3 presentations from each of the authors of these 3 books, and they'll tell you a little bit about the books. And then we'll open up for questions from the audience. So there's going to be really loads of opportunity for you to ask about the project and ask about the books that are being presented. And then during the questions, we're going to take a couple of brief interludes where we're going to hear from all of the other members of the team who've been working on this project, and they'll have the opportunity to introduce themselves, and you'll be able to ask them questions about the research that they've been doing and the books that they're writing and preparing. So we've scheduled an hour for the event. We might run a bit over. We'll go until 3:30 if we need to. And if you want to ask a question, then you can either raise your hand using the raise hand function, or you can put your question in the chat anytime you want to, and we'll pick it up when we're doing the Q&A. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to the lead of the Anthropology of Smartphones and Smart Aging project, Danny Miller.
Well, thank you very much, Hannah. And just to say, you're all very welcome. Forward to hearing from you. So I'm not actually going to talk about the sort of academic findings of the global smartphone, because other members of the team will be referring to these during the course of the next hour. Kind of wanted to give a sense of what
So we can't hear you, Danny.
Okay, am I back?
Yes.
Am I back? Good. Sorry, don't know what happened there. Censorship. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about the academic findings of the book, because these are going to be talked about by other members of the team as we proceed. I wanted to give more a sense of kind of what kind of book this is. First thing to say is it's not easy to write a book with 11 authors, but it wasn't a book where kind of like everyone comes at the end in order to write. This is being a team project. And we have been discussing these things incessantly right from the beginning of the project amongst ourselves. Equally, we're concerned with the way we kind of respect, if you like, the sort of humanity of our research participants. And that speaks to this as our understanding of an anthropological book. What we mean is at one end of the spectrum, this is a book that has claims, big generalizations about the smartphone, and much more about what its consequences are for people. But when you have a generalization like that, what we then try and do is say, well, yes, but then it kind of depends on which of the various field sites we're talking about. But then field sites are too generalized. So the book itself is replete with lots and lots of kind of stories, things about individuals, about relationships. We're also very pleased that we've been able to include these short videos, because there's a place where, in a sense, you can kind of meet these people, the people we worked with, sometimes kind of hear their voice. So the overall aim, what makes it anthropological for us, is that you have, on the one hand, the big generalizations based on all this evidence, but in a way that actually allows you always to sense the kind of humanity of every single individual that we worked with. Another facet of anthropology is that I think in some ways we can be kind of the slowest and the fastest. We didn't compromise on the scholarship. It's all 16 months ethnography and in terms of the writing up. But at the same time, we actually think in some ways anthropology can be in the vanguard of dealing with the kind of latest iteration of culture. That this is the first book that really does give a sense of what this massively important object, the smartphone, really turns out to be when seen from the perspective of its disparate uses and its consequences. We're also concerned with the consumption of the book itself. You'll see this is a book that is written, I hope, with clarity, it's friendly, it's accessible. We're not sort of claiming the status of kind of jargon or kind of obfuscation. And as part of that, we're already actually translating the book into all the languages of the different field sites so that it can be read by our research participants anywhere or anybody else. And those will start to come out maybe sort of 6 months or a year from now. We are writing the individual monographs based on the different ethnographies. And finally, we didn't just also want to contribute to education. We also had a commitment in this project to directly try and benefit the welfare of populations. So there is also a book that is going to be about the various mHealth initiatives that we've variously been involved in. And actually that's something that Marilia will mention also in the final presentation today. So to conclude, yes, you're very welcome. Please do ask questions, and we look forward to a dialogue, not just now, but going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. So I think we're going to move on now to hear from Pauline.
Hi, everyone. Delighted that you're with us today. My name is Pauline Garvey. I'm an anthropologist from Maynooth University in Ireland. Danny and I conducted research together in 2 locations in Dublin for our book, Aging with Smartphones in Ireland, When Life Becomes Craft. And while doing research for this book, one thing that we found striking was the degree to which traditional categories of age, as they were experienced and understood, have diminished. Many of our research participants in their 60s, 70s, and 80s did not see or describe themselves as old, and often actually discounted age as their most defining feature. So far from traditional portraits of a family patriarch or matriarch being housebound or in decline, talking about the good old days, our research participants were busy crafting their lives in retirement. In fact, these individuals would say to us frequently, "I have never been so busy." So they would be out on long walks, they would be meeting friends for coffee, they might be doing yoga or walking the Camino, but they were embracing new opportunities that retirement offered them, and were often happy to relinquish or even shrug off their identity based on their previous working occupation. And this is one difference that we found in Dublin than from some of our other field sites. So the smartphone is central to this experience of age and retirement, because far from being a youth technology, both quickly and profoundly, it has been widely adopted by this cohort to stay more connected, to be more engaged, to be more embedded in family and friend networks. And by so doing, our research participants themselves felt more youthful. So as well as this shift in the subjective experience of age, we also found that smartphones were impacting in the experience of family. Whereas previously, people would say to us that they would meet their extended family maybe a couple of times a year at weddings or at funerals, through messaging apps like WhatsApp, they managed to integrate their extended family into their daily lives, into their daily routines. So one woman said to me, for example, that she watched Love Island every week with her daughter and her niece, and they would watch it together, even though they were in different cities in Ireland. And she would text saying, "That guy is a Wally," and her niece would respond, "What is she wearing?" And through these mechanisms, they were able to weave their extended family into their daily routines and into their life experience in a way that hasn't been seen in Ireland for a long time. So what we're seeing is that people are crafting their own lives, they're crafting their health, they're crafting their relationship to social relations, their ideas of spirituality, and that's why we call the subtitle When Life Becomes Craft.
Great, thank you, Pauline. And now we're going to go to Shireen, who's going to tell us about the third book.
Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Shireen Walton. I'm a lecturer in anthropology at Goldsmiths, University of London, and it's great to see so many friends and colleagues here today. Thank you for joining us. So to share a very brief overview of my book, Aging with Smartphones in Urban Italy, Care and Community in Milan and Beyond. So my book considers the experiences of a range of people of different ages and backgrounds in an inner city neighborhood in Milan where I was based for my research. And it explores how the lives of my research participants play out in different contexts and across multiple scales, locally, transnationally, and digitally online. Research participants that I came to know had moved to the city and or the country at different points in their life, from other regions of Italy, as well as from countries including Egypt, Peru, the Philippines, Afghanistan. They had done so under very different circumstances, and these life journeys and diverse experiences of migration are among the themes discussed in the book. I came to learn about how older adults experience and shape their time and their social worlds between levels and ideas of autonomy, privacy, and freedom. And the book deals how the smartphone is embedded in people's daily life, their work, their activities, and above all, their relationships. So to consider some examples from the book. When Pietro and his wife, Maria, in their 70s, had recently been added to a WhatsApp group representing the apartment building they had lived in for over 30 years, the two had very different reactions to this. While Maria had welcomed the digital sociality and its usefulness for communicating on practical matters and also making friends, Pietro was more ambivalent about this unfamiliar mode of communication, especially since the WhatsApp group had quickly morphed from the supposed original purpose of information exchange to the wider postings of emojis, memes, and even poems. At the same time, the notifications Pietro receives on his phone, including wider notifications such as news alerts, bring him pleasure throughout the day, and making him and Maria feel connected to a certain social buzz of being present remotely that they particularly enjoyed in retirement. For Rosalba in her 60s, who lives by herself, the smartphone was a kind of familiar presence, informing her about the weather or recipes found online on YouTube. Rosalba had drawn comfort from the multiple presences contained within the phone, particularly those of her children and extended family. And at the same time, the smartphone was a deeply ambiguous object, something she felt guilty about using quite so much, frequently expressing her concern of how much time it robbed from her. For Noor in her early 50s, who was born and grew up in Egypt and who had been living in Milan with her family for over a decade, the smartphone was implicated in her broader reconciling of place, work, and care between Alexandria and Milan. The smartphone, as my book suggests, presents no ready answers to a number of life's questions and dilemmas, but in many cases it is there, adopted in diverse ways as what I refer to in the book as a constant companion in the figuring out of life and the multiple entanglements of the life course. In many cases, seen throughout our project, the smartphone presents what we call in our book, the global smartphone, a transport or home, or a place within which we live. And this is something that Laura Harpiokirk, my colleague, will speak more about shortly in relation to her work in Japan as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, great, thank you, and thanks to. It's great to hear a kind of short insight into these books and to begin to hear about some of the things that are cutting across the books, but also the differences of issues that are emerging in each of the field sites. So now it's time to open up to the audience to see what questions people have got and things that people might want to ask. We've got a couple of questions already in the chat, so we can start with those, but if you want to add to the chat or you want to put your hand up, just do, and we'll come to you in turn. So the first question that we've got in the chat is from Sarah Ho, and it's for Pauline. So she writes, hello, Pauline. I'm curious to know if literacy impacted upon their experience with smartphones.
Hi, sorry, Susan, Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Yeah, it would be interesting to know a little bit more about your questions. So all of our research participants were literate in these two locations in Dublin suburbs. But if you're talking about literacy in terms of their fluency with digital devices, then that's something different. And we will be talking today about some of the problems with digital exclusion and people who felt excluded from these digital devices and the significant barrier that that posed.
If Sarah wants to come in and say anything to elaborate, would you like to join? Would you like to?
Sure, yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, yeah. Hi, Pauline. Yeah, I think I was talking about it in terms of maybe, written or verbal literacy. So I'm based here in Singapore, and my grandmother is also Singaporean, and she's illiterate. She's 70 years old, and I think that's greatly impacted on her ability to, or her uptake of a smartphone. So I'm curious, I guess, from your end, if you saw that as a potential barrier, and interesting as well to know that in your field site there were no illiterate people. So.
Not in my field site, but if you're looking at the ASA as a group, then in other field sites, it may very well have been an issue. But in Dublin, amongst our research respondents, yeah, they were all, everyone I know was literate.
Okay, great.
Just chipping to this question, because that actually leads to a very curious observation in China, that I do notice that, first of all, like most people I study do, can read and write, but in a way the education background matters and have the different influence, because you see that actually better educated people, they somehow more reluctant, and less educated people, they just embrace it. And also for old people who feel it's difficult to type, because in China, the typing in Chinese characters is more complicated. They love this, like the audio message provided by the social media, so which like link to the literacy. So I also know that like people can't really read or write, they rely heavily on this audio message. So in a way, it's like different angle, and it's definitely provides more, we call it affordance for people to explore the possibility. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so we've got quite a few questions in the chat, and we've also got a hand raised. So we'll take one more from the chat first. So the next question is from Pierre, who I haven't got your surname, but from Cambridge Anthropology, who asks, is smartphone a general category in terms of technological device, or particularly exclusive from other devices such as iPads or iWatches? And what about the dumb phone in the contemporary? Who would like to answer that? Maybe Danny?
I can do. I mean, I think the other person though would probably say something about that could be, Charlotte was working in an area where actually the majority of people would have had traditional mobile phones as opposed to smartphones. But smartphones for us is very much a distinct category in terms of the difference from traditional mobile phones in terms of, I think, the things you're familiar with. It's essentially an aggregate of the apps that are on it, the connections with the internet, etc. We do, however, in relation to your question, have a section in our book, in the Global Smartphone, that discusses how it plays out with respect to other the digital communication devices like iPads, etc. And we have this notion called screen ecology, because I think what we realized very early on is you can't study the smartphone without equally studying those things. I mean, if somebody is doing their banking on an iPad and therefore doesn't have an app on their smartphone, you clearly need to know that. So the point about a screen ecology is that everything we do, we try and have a kind of holistic sense of it. And one of those commitments, the holistic commitments, be to understand all the devices. You have to understand smart TVs. You have to understand tablets. You have to understand, you know, other mobile phones, and you have to understand the smartphone then structurally in relation to all the other screens that people might be using simultaneously, even casting back and forth. I think projects that just worked on the smartphone without that wider context would actually be quite problematic on the basis of the evidence from our project.
Charlotte, your turn.
Yeah, sure. So if I just jump in on that. So hi, everyone, my name is Charlotte Hawkins and I'm a PhD researcher on the ASA project. And I did my research in Kampala, which is the capital of Uganda, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But yeah, as Danny mentioned, perhaps my field site was distinct from the others in that the smartphone is owned by about 30% of the people that I worked with. And that's kind of broadly reflected across national statistics in Uganda as well. But smartphones are owned by a growing minority. You know, even that statistic I just gave could very quickly be outdated. The uptake of smartphones in Uganda as across the region is particularly rapid. So smartphones, digital divides between, you know, the haves and haves not can't be really drawn in a kind of strict binary, that it's much more complex and shifting process. Somebody who owns a smartphone now might break in future. There's a lot of other factors involved in terms of, you know, the quality of the smartphone. One of the major factors in where I was working is access to data. Costs of data are extremely prohibitive. So the use of smartphones is used in a much more kind of rationed way, but they are, you know, universally significant regardless of whether they're owned or not. Perhaps they might be shared across the household, across the neighborhood. So they're definitely all, as Danny says, very much integrated with other forms of technology, including mobile phones as well.
Thanks, Charlotte. That's really interesting. So I think we should go to the audience and to the hands up for the next couple of questions. So the next one is from Rick Adrians.
Hi, thanks everyone for the presentations. I have a question to no one in particular, although I think Xinyuan and Danny might feel more addressed by the question. I'm really interested in the relation between the smartphone project and the previous social media project. And one thing that I really found interesting about the project that in which Danny and Xinyuan were involved as well on social media was its kind of critique of sociological ideas of networked individualism. This idea that basically this idea, which was proposed by some theorists, that smartphones and social media would be leading towards a kind of erosion of group solidarities and traditional forms of community, and lead to a kind of customized individual networks. And when I hear the kind of key theories from the new project, such as perpetual opportunism and the transportal home, I get the sense that these have moved perhaps a bit closer to this idea of networked individualism. So I'm curious whether anyone feels that maybe the critique of the link between social media and smartphones, and whether they make us more individualistic or not, whether that has changed in the course of these two projects.
Okay. Well, I go first, certainly. Thank you very much for the question, and a really interesting one. You're completely right that when we started with social media, I think we were trying to contest a common view. Oh, it's, you know, individual ego, etc., or it's kind of people's now just a network of digital communications. And we emphasize that actually, no, this brings families back and it brings community back in all sorts of ways. You're equally right, though, in the new project, it is actually more of a compromise. And one of the reasons for that is actually smartphones are so much bigger than social media. It's not just the latest way we do social media. Smartphones is, you know, your GPS, you're looking up the libraries, you're going shopping. It's really much of life. And it's very important now to understand that social media is just one kind of aspect of this. This is huge, much bigger than that. And because of that, it's going to be kind of almost everything at once. There were bound to be many instances which actually relate to more of a kind of individualism. One of them being the degree to which the smartphone itself can be transformed by the user to actually express the personality and character of each individual in a way that I think no device previously in history had ever been able to do to this extent. So certainly you want to be able to sort of see that as one component of it. And yet the conclusions about social media would still stand. That is to say, we, you know, as was already said, that it actually does, by Pauline, that changes actually the nature of family relations back into, for example, extended families, which is very much the kind of argument we were making in the previous book. So there's some continuity, but you're quite right in what you were saying. There's also a compromise, and we say this in the book. We actually have a little section where we talked about our relationship to Barry Wellman and network theories, and we say, you know, we have more in common with you now, maybe, than we did in the previous project.
Yeah, I would agree with Danny. It's almost like it's the growing richness is become more and more matched with the real life, that you, on the one hand, you have a more empowered to get your individual voice heard. And actually, I really appreciate the question, because it's really more encourage people to read the book, because so many nuance underneath the term or individualism or whatever. And actually in the previous Why We Post project, my case actually is exactly the opposite, because I studied the Chinese factory worker. They are so bounded with the traditional idea, and the social media allow them to be themselves. But this time I studied like middle class older people in Shanghai, and again the situation is different, but it all depends on the specific situation. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, let's go to Jay Sokolovsky next. I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Mute.
There you are.
How about that? I said thank you for handling my last name with great ease and poise. Thank you very much. And I want to say that this is, as someone who's worked on the anthropology of aging for the last 40 years, I was so thrilled to discover this project. I have, I guess, integrated questions. I hope that they're integrated. And that first part is, what was the most difficult part of doing and integrating visual and digital recording with other more traditional ethnographic methods? And part B, how are the methods of the ASA project how could it inform anthropology about the possibilities of fieldwork and research dissemination in the age of COVID? I see those two things as part of similar issues.
Who'd like to answer that?
I can have a go. Hi, Jay. Thank you for your question.
Hello, sorry.
Hi, and hi, everyone. I'm Laura, and I did my research in Japan. I guess about visual methods, I would say, you know, just following the normal daily practices of my informants, videoing, taking photos was just so much of a natural part of their everyday lives, and experiencing, you know, everyday realities, going for a meal, even just going for a walk together. They would be taking just as many photos and videos as I would be. And it really just felt very much integral to just participating in life with them. So I would say that my visual methods just really felt like doing very natural ethnography, and sort of mirroring the actions of my participants. And yeah, and I think that probably that was the experience of many of the team. I know that when we came back from our research and we sort of spent a lot of time together, I think we were very much in that mode of having to record and taking photos of everything. And I think Xinyuan's got a lot of video footage of the team and sort of that sensibility of just being, recording and responding with your smartphone as a key tool for doing ethnography, really then sort of sustained into our daily lives. I don't know if Xinyun can expand on that.
Yeah, definitely. As Laura mentioned, it's like we study smartphone, but also smartphone become now one of very key research tool, and we definitely take advantage of the perpetual opportunism. So when we just like walk around in our field sites, like definitely hundreds of photos, like always take photos, and it's actually we will benefit from it. Like also the short videos, and also it's also the way we communicate with our informant or research participant easily, because nowadays people feel they're more comfortable just sharing photos than describing things, because that become the visual communication as observed in several field sites. So in a way, it's not just very traditional narrowed methodology, but it's like so embedded in the research, the whole progress.
Okay.
Can I jump in there as well? And just say how contextual this is, because it's a very interesting question, and it's very interesting to compare with what Xinyun and Laura have said, because I found something very different in Ireland, and people were very, for photographs, a lot of our older informants were quite uncomfortable with taking photographs, which in itself posed an interesting anthropological question. So I think it really depended on the different contexts where we were doing research and how well we were able to integrate that visual aspect into our research methodology.
Can I jump in, Danny? Can I jump in?
Please.
Hi, hello. My name is Maya de Vries. Also here is Laila Bedrabo. We will introduce ourselves in a minute as well. We did our study in El Quds, East Jerusalem. I just want to add to what Laura and Xinyun and also Pauline said in terms of how you embed as a researcher in the field site. So one of the things that happened for us is to take part in the WhatsApp group in our field site. So even when we were going away from the field site late afternoon, in the evening, we were still taking part in the field site through their WhatsApp group of our participants. Of course, it raises also ethical questions that we can discuss later, but we were actually almost 24/7 in the field site, also online.
Okay, I think we should move now to have a little interlude to hear directly from some of the other participants in the project and to hear about what their research was. Chloe, I see your hand is up. We'll come to you straight after this. So, and then we'll go back into the chat. We've got loads of questions. So I think that the first person we have on the list is Lottie.
Yes, hello again. Yeah, so as I said, I did my research in Kampala, and I was primarily based in a small low-income area in the center of the city there. And in this context, the ASA research interest around aging with smartphones has translated to a focus on cooperation, how people uphold their family roles and relationships despite drastic socioeconomic change. So in the Global Smartphone book, chapter 3 is about discourses around smartphones, how people talk about phones, even if it's distinct from how they actually use them. And often these conversations are subsumed into wider moral, political, and intergenerational debates. And of course, this manifests differently in each of the very different contexts that we've worked in. So where I worked in Kampala, this manifests in concerns around the younger generation's excessive use of phones, exposing them to corrupting influences of individualism, materialism, pornography, and an increasing disregard for the older generation and their knowledge. And Patrick will talk about a similar dynamic based on his research in Yaoundé and Cameroon after this. What's interesting in my ethnography is that despite these widespread discourses, the research showed how people often use their phones to uphold care and respect for their elders. So, for example, I often saw how my research participants would send mobile money remittances or make phone calls, often for health purposes, for their older relatives living at home in rural areas. And this is a key finding of my research. that whilst the smartphone is feared to be undermining respect and care for elders, both as an icon and as a platform itself, it also accommodates their care, their respect and social status, despite increasing distances. And this phenomenon of care at a distance is global, and we'll see it in discussions throughout the rest of today around the phone as a transportal home.
Thanks, Charlotte. That's great. So I think we're going to then now go on to Patrick, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Yes, I'm Patrick Hondo. I'm a lecturer at University of Yaoundé 1, and I was a research fellow in this ASA program. I did my fieldwork in Yaoundé, which is the capital of Cameroon, which is in Central Africa. And I would say the main focus was on how the smartphone has changed the relationship between generations, like Lottie just mentioned. What was striking in Yaoundé was that for the very first time, older people were no longer the ultimate repositories of knowledge, its circulation and organization. They constantly referred to the fact that they were obliged to learn from young so-called digital natives. Therefore, they are facing a situation of kind of historical inversion away from the more traditional hierarchy represented by seniority. One of the major components of my research participant in the use of smartphone is the time they spend watching videos and photographs, and the commitment they give in their WhatsApp family and friend group to try to regulate the kind of videos and content that circulate. And by doing that, older people try to remain the gatekeepers of moral and cultural value in the society, but they are limited and challenged by the waves and the huge amounts of content spread by younger generation that obviously kind of counter the main narrative my informant would like to promote. That was the most striking part of this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. That's great. And so now we're going to go to Xinwan.
All right. Hi, I'm Xi Yuan. So I did my fieldwork in Shanghai, the biggest metropolis in China, with 26 million residents and rapid aging population. So the term we just mentioned, the perpetual optimism, suggests that in our global smartphone book, which describes the situation that the smartphone use is now everywhere, anytime, for people to arrange all kinds of activity and events, we'll probably find one of the most vivid example in urban China, where in a way that no one can live without a smartphone anymore in urban China. So from taxi hailing to hospital appointment, mobile pay basically replaced cash totally. And even when people dump daily rubbish, there's a specific QR code to scan. So this kind of like a deep extent of digitalization. And particularly, I found that older people in China tend to have much more positive, generally positive attitude towards the use of the smartphone. And compared to other societies, as observed in our ASA project, and there's a deep reason for that, because these older generations, they experienced all kinds of drastic social transformations in contemporary Chinese society, say from the political turmoil to in communist time to the economic reform, from one-child policy to the so-called information revolution. So this older generation's life is so closely associated with one word, revolution. So for many older people in China to embrace the digital, the smartphone, is actually regarded as the moral responsibility as a good citizen to support the state's drive to the digital modernity. And for many of them, in their early life, in their youth, they actually don't have the opportunity to really actually develop their personal hobbies or aspiration, because their youth in a way is hijacked by the political ideology and all kinds of movements. So for these people now, because of the empowerment of the smartphone, they actually took the chance to develop their hobbies and aspirations, and in a way they live their unlived youth finally when they're getting old. So that's my key message.
Thank you, Xinran. And then finally we're going to go to Laura in this sort of cluster of mini presentations.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Laura and I worked in Japan. As Shireen spoke about earlier, it can be helpful to think of the smartphone as a kind of transportal home. And on the ASA blog, we've just published a comic inspired by the story about Noor that Shireen told us from her research. So do go and check that out if you want to. And I think Georgiana might be posting a link to that in the chat. So in Japan, similarly to Italy, intergenerational family relationships now often take place through video calls and messaging on the smartphone rather than people living together as used to be the norm. And for many of the people that I met, their primary concern about getting older was that they don't want to be a burden on the people around them. And I found that the smartphone was really being used to mitigate the burden of care by facilitating care at a distance and reducing the emphasis on the physical home as the primary site for care. Now, Japan famously has one of the oldest populations in the world, and this is even more pronounced in rural areas. I conducted my research both in Kyoto and in a small rural town in the southwest. And in this town called Tosacho, over 40% of people are aged 65 and over. Wada-san, a local man in his 70s, actually blamed the smartphone for contributing to his region's depopulation, suggesting that the device made single living too convenient, leading to people not having babies anymore. So I think while the smartphone on the one hand connects families living apart and acts as this kind of transportal home, this very same development can also be understood as contributing to the fragmentation of the family and even to processes of depopulation, as Wada-san suggested.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, so I think we'll pause from these presentations just to go back to a couple more questions from the audience, because there's quite a lot of questions that are built up, and then we'll hear from the last three members of the project in a few minutes' time. So Chloe has had her hand up for a long time, so I'll go to you next, Chloe, and then we'll go back into questions from the chat.
Hi, thanks. Hi, yes, so thanks for the great talk. It was really interesting and inspiring, so thanks for that. My question is more about the logistics and operational side of this project. So I work in industry as an ethnographer, and I've actually got a few of my colleagues that I've like roped into watching this with me. And one of the problems that we have in a big corporation is actually getting our ethnographic insights to have a big impact with stakeholders, business, and I've seen that through your work, Danny, that you've managed to get like press tours, books, a course, and I just want to know how you've done this. Was this all kind of planned and sought out from the beginning, or do you make these kind of partnerships from midway? How does that all work?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think the first point really is that this was so central to what we understood the whole project being about. I mean, when you're working on something like the smartphone, who doesn't want to know about it? Who wouldn't be interested if you really claim that you have insights into this that previously weren't available. And so we felt, yes, I mean, we don't want to just, write little journal articles. And I mean, we do want to write this as well, but, the academics will read, but we wanted to reach back to pretty much everybody. And there's a whole series of different elements that came together in so as you know, the last project, we got a million downloads book. That was beyond anything actually we even expected. So various factors. I mean, the first thing is we're committed to open access. I mean, nobody is paying for anything. And of course, that makes a difference. A lot of the places where we work, people do not have much by way of income. They're not going to buy an expensive book. I think open access is vital to anthropology generally, and we want to support it. Secondly, and I think equally important, is how you write. We're itching to write complex academic things, all of us, because that's the way we think. But we resolved that actually, they go into footnotes or they go into journals, that everything should be about clarity, accessibility, writing in a friendly manner, writing with stories that are engaging. Because, if you're an anthropologist, that's what you've got. These people that you're working with are just so interesting. And why haven't we been always kind of trying to bring that to people so that there is that direct sense of the reader is as fascinated as we are with the extraordinary things, creative things that people are doing with these smartphones. I mean, I don't want to speak too long. So those are, I mean, there's 10 other things that we have tried to do. So yes, it's planned and it's deliberate and it's what we want to achieve. But you have to do a lot of things to actually, to manage that and actually get it out there. And obviously one of the things we're hoping for is that the same is going to be true of the global smartphone, because we think everybody would get interested in reading this book.
Can I just add something? I think it should be said as well that strategically, right from the beginning, when you're sort of initially planning this project, and the same with the last one, you had the role of a dissemination officer sort of embedded within the funding bid. So I think thinking, about forms of dissemination and having someone to manage that, which in this case it's been Georgiana, I think is really integral right from the beginning. And I think that kind of ensures that it, is inbuilt into the project.
As Laura was for the last one.
Yes.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, so if we go to the chat, the next question we've got in the chat is from Satyabrata Sahu, who I'd like to invite you to ask your questions. I'm not totally sure I understand entirely, and I think it would be better if you could just contextualize it a little bit. I think you're still here. Would you like to ask?
Hello, everyone. Myself, Satyabrat.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, sure. Actually, you will be getting some wind noises because I'm in the middle of a cyclone, actually. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. My question was when we are talking about smartphone and we are talking about aging, when don't we face any psychosocial behavioral changes?
So when we're talking about smartphones, does it bring about psychosocial changes in behavior? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well,
yeah.
I can start a bit, because I guess when you say bring us together, then it's the big question is, what is us? Because for anthropologists, us, it actually means a different layer, different groups. So actually, I think at least my finding, or our project's finding, is people tend to take the opportunity of the digital opportunity to be close to whoever they want to be together at the first place. So of course, if we're talking about smartphone as the machine, then there's a different thing. But because smartphone is our transporter home, it's a place where we can connect people we always want to connect with, it definitely have significant psychological, mental impact on our behavior. And I guess everybody, after 1 year of pandemic, that I think everybody can relate to that kind of impact. And of course, it can be negative and positive, as all the social life could possibly have in our daily life. Sorry, Charlotte, I think you can continue. I finished.
Yeah, well, I was going to say something quite similar, I guess, just kind of bringing it into an anthropological perspective. And obviously in digital anthropology, we're often interested in looking at how digital tools like the smartphone are embedded in our existing relationships, and how that can highlight trajectories of social change and continuity more broadly. And typically it's both. Like obviously a lot of the time we think about the smartphone as this tool of transformation, and of course it's brought people together in unprecedented ways. But at the same time, we're also interested in how people have adapted it to their socio-cultural preferences, their existing relationships, and really what we can learn about that continuity as well.
Thank you. Thanks for those answers. I think we'll take one more question from the chat, and then we'll hear from the other three participants in the project who we've not heard from yet. So the next question in the chat is from Tiago, who's a PhD student at the Federal University in Santa Maria in South Brazil. And he says, in my research, I study the theme of digital detox in Brazil. It's about people who want to disconnect themselves from social media apps and digital platforms for some reason, even in an increasingly connected world. So in his field, one of the reasons for disconnection is work to be more productive, and health to control anxiety. And he writes, I noticed that in the island research, many people look for disconnection swimming in the bay. So he's asking if you could tell us a bit more about the theme of disconnection in your research. Maybe Pauline should pick this one up first.
Hi, yeah, I'm smiling because I think you're referring to the blog where we're talking about the right to disconnect that's been introduced recently. And also how people are responding to that, both in their online worlds, but also in their offline. So the swimming was one example that I wrote about in the blog. And yeah, I think it's a balance that people are trying to balance their connections, their online world. You know, it brings burdens as well as it brings social connectivity. And it's always a sort of juggling act for people. You know, they are using their smartphones in order to connect, but also can feel burdened by that. So I think when we're looking at it in our anthropological research, we're trying to understand the ways by which people deal with that juggling act, how they deal with the burdens, you know, how they kind of feel if and how and when they feel the needs to disconnect, if and how and when they feel the needs to connect. And it's trying to look at how it's integrated into their everyday routines. So in the blog that you're referring to there, it's just about swimming as a way through which some people said, you know, I'm on my computer all day, I need to feel my body. And they do something that has that sort of shock therapy in Ireland. You know, when you're swimming, it's shock therapy. Just to feel their bodies, just to have a sense of something completely different.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about disconnection from their projects that they want to share?
Well, I do have come across a very interesting project actually launched by Tencent company. The company owns QQ and WeChat. So it's very funny. They actually respond to this kind of like collective desire to disconnect. They call the social media fast. So they encourage people to do that. And I was involved as like observer or advisor. And one thing I noticed very interesting is all the volunteers who do this like social media fast, the very last thing they did is to put announcement on their social media saying, sorry, everybody, I can't reply your message. Sorry, everybody, please email me and find a different alternative way to connect me. So, and then I come to them and said like, that's very interesting, which means that people can bear with the disconnection for 2 weeks. And that's basically like the home quarantine, but they can bear with it because they know that once after that, they will go back to the social norms. They will go back to normal life. So it's in a way, it's possibly you can see it as just like the food fast. So you know that short time fast is good for you, but also people already know that they need to say sorry, because the mere fact that they are not there is not socially accepted. And that is the key message of this social media fast, what I learned from their experiment.
Can I
sorry, please.
We all have a lot to say about this. No, up to you guys, please.
Patrick, you go first, or?
Yeah, go Patrick, you can talk first.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I was just thinking about how ambivalent and paradoxical this can be in a field work like in a field like Cameroon. You of course, this is also part of a kind of social activism in the social network. You have people, going for that. They keep saying we have to disconnect. So they are committed to this kind of activism, but they don't disconnect. So it is something that is also today part of the narratives on cultural imperialism and every kind of ambivalent use of smartphone and its content in the context. But like Shinran just said, this is far from being a global movement that can have impact on people's behavior in terms of disconnection.
Just to add, hi, I'm Marilia. I made my ethnography in São Paulo, Brazil. And just to agree with Patrick, in Brazil, like this concern about being all the time connected or addicted, it's more a discourse than a practice, because actually people don't want to disconnect it. And it's not that they don't want to disconnect from their smartphones, they want to disconnect from people. So they start the day by saying good morning to their families and then spend all day through the WhatsApp groups. And in the sense with what Pauline said, like she raised the point about disconnecting to be more productive or to work. But in my case, the participation on WhatsApp groups became a kind of work, because that's the way older people became active, but in actually where they can achieve a sense of utility. So they are not just watching the amount of information that keeps coming, but they are also committed to contribute to this information, because mainly are information that are making their life better.
Shireen, did you want to add?
Yes, thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I was just going to add to both Patrick and Marilia and Shinran, really, just to say that, in the case of, for all of us, we were contending with this issue of, yes, disconnecting from what? And I like Marilia's distinction there between the people within the phone and the wider activities of the phone, like playing games or doing other things. And often, there's the emotional labor of being on the phone, is quite significant. And as we said before, many of us spend a lot of time in multiple WhatsApp groups, in my case, women's choir groups, or kind of, really big community activist groups or NGO groups, just groups, a lot of the time in these WhatsApp groups. There's a lot of time that one has to be available, and the burden of availability is indeed something that we explore throughout our projects. And in my work in Italy, in one of my chapters, in particular, chapter 4 looks at social availability and tries to sort of tease that out with regards to smartphone practices, but also contextualizing that in wider sort of older forms of being available and unavailable, sort of shutting your curtains or just kind of taking time away. So if you want to read more about that, please do. So yeah, I think it's something all of us were contending with.
Great, that was a great question. Obviously lots to talk about on that topic. Okay, let's hear from the other three members who haven't had a chance to present their work specifically yet. So I think we're going to go to Leila Maya first.
Yes, Leila will go first.
Hello, everybody. My name is Leila Bedrabo. I am a researcher at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
And hello, my name is Maya de Vries. I'm also a researcher at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. We were both working at the field site of Dar el Hawa, a Palestinian neighborhood in El Quds, East Jerusalem, working with mainly older Palestinian women.
An interesting finding from Al-Quds field site was that there is an increasing digital divide because most older people in Dar el-Hawa don't have a credit card, which means that they can't do online shopping or use many of other apps.
In addition to that, we learned that this digital divide could also impact on their access to health facilities. The reason for that is because many of the government websites and apps are only partially translated into Arabic. So if they have not learned to read or speak Hebrew, these are closed to them. And that may impact on their ability to use the health services that they are entitled to.
Thank you. Okay, and so we'll hear from Alfonso now.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Hannah, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alfonso Otagi, and I am an anthropologist based at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. So on the one hand, I did part of my fieldwork among Peruvian migrants, focusing on communication and transnational families. On the other hand, I did fieldwork among retired older adults who were learning to use the smartphone. So I taught and did participant observation in a smartphone workshop for older adults for over a year, besides joining them in meals, trips, and everyday stuff. So older adults have an ambivalent relationship with new technologies. And to understand this relationship, it's necessary to see them as people living their everyday life, new tech being a part of that, not as mere users operating a device. And that is why we do ethnography. And for these older adults, the smartphone is a young people thing that has been imposed upon them by digital government policies, the COVID crisis, their own family who want to take care of them at a certain distance, and so on. However, the smartphone allows them also to keep up with new ways of socialization and accessing useful information. And as several factors affect the experience of aging, in the same way, several factors affect the adoption of new technology by older adults. Familiarity with previous technologies, education, time passed in retirement, fine motor skills, self-esteem, health, family ties, for example, the possibility of a younger kin helping them, which never works actually. And I found frustration, anxiety, complicated interfaces, but also enthusiasm and curiosity. When they learned what Wikipedia was, how to use it, and what a hyperlink was, these blue letters that take you somewhere else, they were just marveled. And I can say that with proper guidance and codified learning methodology, older adults are perfectly capable of not only learning to use the smartphone, but also to adopting it to the point of making it their own, going way beyond the merely operational skills that this workshop were intended to teach. Take, for example, Valentina, 81 years old, trying to engage her friends through WhatsApp to vote for the new constitution in Chile and using WhatsApp to give her political activity wider reach. Or Sulima, 76 years old, learning to take HDR photos, using app to edit her photos and posting them on Instagram, where she has over 7,000 followers. Or making simple tasks more complex, like Sylvia, 79 years old, who, as she doesn't know the icon to forward an email, what she does is she does a screenshot, then goes to the gallery app, share WhatsApp in order to forward an email to her sister. So it is a longer operative chain, 3 apps instead of 1 click, but hey, it just works for her. So in the end, for older adults, mastering the smartphone means not simply digital inclusion. It's never our aim, actually. It's social inclusion and fully engaged citizenship. And our comparative book provides many key findings on this ambivalent relationship between aging and technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfonso. And so now we'll go to Marilia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marilia. I'm based in São Paulo, Brazil, where I conducted my ethnography. And today I'm talking about the applied side of this project. We all started with a commitment to contribute to an mHealth initiative in each field site. By that, we expected this meant collaborating with specialized mHealth apps. But during field work, we observed resistance to the use of those apps, mostly because of the tech adoption barriers and digital literacy issues as addressed before by Alfonso and Maya. However, we also observe an impressive use of apps like WhatsApp for Health, purpose that goes beyond the carrot distance within traditional or transnational or extended families, as addressed before by Pauline, Lotte, and Shireen. In the book, we call this kind of appropriation smart from below. In my case, doing my field work in São Paulo, for example, online medical consultation were not regulated by government yet. Even so, WhatsApp mediated the communication among doctors and between patients and care providers. One of my applied efforts was to develop a protocol to systematize this practice and improve their chance of being formally adopted in public and private health systems. I also worked together with the Unifest Medical School to turn WhatsApp into a visual food diary to nutritionists, as overweight and malnutrition were key issues among older people in Brazil. It's true that many mHealth apps do already offer visual food diaries, but this was a chance to have a ready-to-use solution to nutritionists, as WhatsApp became the main means of communication among Brazilians, including older people. At the end, like me, other members of the group developed their own initiatives around the use of everyday apps for health. And thank you.
Thank you. So that's so nice to have heard from everyone about all of the different projects that you've been working on as part of this bigger project. So we've still got loads of questions coming through on the chat, which is fantastic. It's really nice to see such a big variety of questions. Maybe we'll take one more from the chat and then we'll go to Katrin, who's got a hand up. So the next question in the chat is about the ethical implications of doing digital ethnography with smartphones. And this is from Violeta Rodriguez, who asks, are there differences with ethics that are marked by the material characteristics of smartphones? So for example, an iPhone versus a Huawei phone. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Well, I can say a little bit of learning to use a smartphone is a challenge without given the infrastructure, because usually you have just a whiteboard, one teacher, one marker, and 25 students. And most of them, actually 24 of them, usually have Android phones. And every Android phone has a different software scheme. So it makes things much difficult to teach. And I would say that this question leads to the question of privacy and what do we teach when we teach about GPS, Google Maps and stuff. And this is now put forward by Apple, who is battling Facebook on the right to access private data. But I would say that when we have to learn about GPS usage and Google Maps, some people were concerned about being followed. Some of them actually turn off their GPS because they prefer not to be followed. But in the end, for them, it was a matter of pragmatical issue. They rather, ignore the fact that the GPS gives the location all the time, and in order to use this app, which turned out to be useful for them. But it implies certain ethical reflections from my part to say, what do I do? How much information do I give? Because they have to make an informed decision of what to do if they turn on or off this GPS feature of the phone. And if some other of my
maybe I can jump in as well. So in El Quds, for example, although the majority of the women that we were spending time with had some digital illiteracy, and not all of them were using smoothly all the apps, but in the smartphone course we did at the community center for that group of women, one of the first questions they asked us and the teacher that we were working with is there an external Wi-Fi here? What is the Wi-Fi here? Am I connected to the Wi-Fi? Is it okay? Is it private? Is it public? So, and we were kind of shocked by it because, I mean, you don't really know how to use WhatsApp, but you're asking like kind of sophisticated question about Wi-Fi. And we were thinking about it, and we came to the understanding that there is a big public debate here about surveillance and monitoring, and it's due to the context, to the political context of the people who are living here in Al-Quds. So I think that was a really important experience for us as researchers, and I think it's also it's a good example for why we are doing this ethnography, why it's a comparative project. It shows the really little nuances and the importance of the context.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Did someone, sorry, I can't see who was just talking. So. Okay.
No, it was me, Patrick.
Oh, Patrick. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a bit to what Maya just said. I think that there are many levels of response to this ethical preoccupation. You have, of course, the very classical issues in research in anthropology, about the data transfers on the research concerning many sites and a transnational dimension like this. And then you have the contextual, the very contextual specificities in contexts like Cameroon, with a lot of political tension and a lot of political implication related to what circulates in social media about the country and about this political tension. Just to say a word about it, you have this crisis in the context between Anglophone speaking part of the country and then the Francophone speaking part of the country. And in terms of, smartphone content, when talking to the people, it was really, really difficult, even after months and months, to convince them to kind of share and show their smartphone content. So you had to explain at different level every day to every single person what are the implications of the kind of research you are doing, and what is the aim of what you are doing, and what are the goals, and where are the informations and the data going after that. So finally, it was, it's digital anthropology, but in terms of ethical consideration, it's just classical response to anthropological ethical situation.
Can I just add a little thing, because like Patrick is saying, like there are the ethical concerns about our research, but the ethical issues were also something that we are addressing in the applied side of the project, because one of the key points is that people are informally using some platforms to do stuffs, even inside like public or governmental organization. But there is like a concern about making this informal use formal. So we have, for example, in Alfonso's field site, he observed this in oncological hospital, like WhatsApp is the formal use of communications among nurses and patients. But when you go to the hospitals and you propose to improve the protocols and the everyday practice based on what you observe and what he heard and what I heard in Brazil from nurses, what are their needs and how to improve them using WhatsApp with what we learned from our class with older people and our workshops. People just say, no, but we can install WhatsApp here legally, but it's already used. So ethical questions is something that we were facing doing all the research, even with our participants, but also with the companies and partners that we are trying to work with and to collaborate.
Thank you for all those really helpful responses. I think the ethics is very tricky and always a kind of process rather than one a kind of moment in a project. So should we go to Katrien Pipe? Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your surname.
Hello, Katrien Pipe is my name.
Pipe, okay.
So thanks to the whole team for presenting their work. I have a question, and maybe I have two questions. One is more about old age as such, and it hasn't been discussed that much here in the Q&A yet, I think. And I was wondering whether, sometimes there's this distinction made between third age and fourth age. Third age being, still, active, healthy, slightly independent elderly people. And then the fourth age would be elderly people who are becoming more and more dependent, less mobile, maybe losing certain mental faculties. And I was wondering whether in any of the case studies that distinction was relevant and translated in a sense in a relationship towards the mobile phone. And then maybe my second question would be, I hear a lot of applause and congratulations about the device and how, the opportunism, all the opportunities it embodies and it opens up. And, I think it's Alfonso who mentioned frustration and anxieties, but what about maybe elderly people who have an aversion against the mobile phone? Are they also included in your research, or conspiracy stories around the mobile phone, and then that influence in one way or the other people's apprehension about the opportunities that mobile phones bring along? Thank you. And this is just to anyone who feels like answering.
I think I can add something to the first question about the distinction between third and fourth age in São Paulo. In my case, for example, for my informants, they made that distinction saying, I'm not old, like real old. So the fourth age will be the real old, that the one that they identify with frailties and this kind of stuff. And they are the healthy ones, the active ones. And I think the smartphones play a key role in these transitions, because I think it was Chinuen who told, or Laura, that older people don't want to be a burden to their children. But in my case, it's this together with the fact they don't expect their children to take care of them. So they are using smartphones, apps, and to expand their permanence in third age. Like they are trying to learn things because they heard that this can help them to improve and maintain their cognitive capacity. They are also arranging groups so they can go out and before pandemic, but they would go out and make exercise. So they have this concern about autonomy, and they are using smartphones to help them to expand this stage of health. And most of them say, no, I don't want to be real old or at the fourth age. I want to die the age they prefer to die is around 80. So 80 is fine for me. I don't want to get sick. I want to die before.
So if I can reply a little bit. So as I said, I did 2 separate fieldworks. One with Peruvian migrants who were 60 years old, still working, proudly workaholics, who do not see retirement in their future. And so I call them late middle age because they were more like still saying they were young, but acknowledging some frailties of older age. And with older adults, Chilean older adults who were taught smartphone, were really different. It's much well with the literature on old age. And I think one important key point is institutional age. From 60 years old on, you are an older adult, you have certain benefits, certain expectations. They were middle class. And I would say they were not fourth age because they were, they say autovalente, they remain autonomous. But however, in order to understand what this old lady who comes to the smartphone workshop wants to learn to use Uber, for example, Uber, it's because her husband has slightly early signs of Alzheimer. He lost himself. So in order to understand her phone, you have to see her familiar circle. So this app is for her to help her husband. So they are in the satellite, in the surrounding areas of her experience, they are fourth age people, so to speak. And when it comes to those people who reject the smartphone, most of the students I taught rejected the smartphone. However, I must say they came to a smartphone workshop. There was, and one of the first stages, they say Van Dursen and Van Dijk, is motivation. And even the most reluctant ones had a motivation, which was actually an imposition. Yeah, all my friends had WhatsApp, so I had to learn to use WhatsApp. However, I had not reached the people who are reluctant and never use. And now, based on these findings from the ASA project and my colleagues, I'm engaging in new initiatives when they try to give a smartphone to older adults who are excluded, so to speak. The problem is, in general, to retake the concept of digital divide brought by Leila, usually policies go to here in Chile and a little bit in Brazil, go to the material aspect, providing devices and networks. Unfortunately, that is not enough. They do not provide the digital skills necessary to be able to use these devices.
I might just take Catherine's second question then, following up from that, which is about without smartphones in our book series of Aging with Smartphones, which I think is an excellent, very welcome question. Thank you. And certainly there were, a number of research participants who, did not have smartphones, and there's the spectrum of opinion or explanation as to why. And this obviously comes back to our methodology, which we talked about earlier, which obviously ethnographers, we didn't come with the phone to people, we came and met people and they brought us what they had and did not had and liked and did not like. So of course, that's how we get to this topic of smartphones, that way round, the people first. But, in my case, in the Milan research, a number of older adults in their 80s I'd met did not have smartphones, and a lot of the sort of their daughters and adult carer daughters worried about this profusely. And were really upset that their parents didn't have smartphones. And this came to a head during the pandemic after the formal conclusion of the fieldwork kind of stage, where, keeping in touch with participants in the field, I looked back at the participants who did not have smartphones, how that then shifted. They were either, some of them were bought smartphones, sort of kind of forced by adult children, or those who still didn't have them, they were calling up to the, 2 sons of one couple I knew in their 80s, they were calling up to 7 times a day on the house phone. And so it was obviously interesting to see those dynamics kind of shift in a heightened period of COVID as well. So yeah, in summary, I think it's about, the story-led, kind of context in which we're working to understand and appreciate things like, aversion to smartphones, including, of course, things like, notions of technophobia and where that comes from, the media, press, commentaries, and wider belief systems and practices as well that explain the whole, that I don't need it. And, it was also seen as an excess for another participant. So yeah, thank you for a great question.
Sorry,
does anyone else want to? Yeah,
I want to add something. I can?
Yes.
Yes. I want to say about our research in Dar el Hawa. all women, we interviewed them. They were happy to use the iPhone, smart iPhone, because they easy for them to connect with the relative and sons in Dar el Hawa and outside in United States, in Jordan, in West Bank. Also, they can use this from WhatsApp and read anything they want. Just one woman refused to use a smart iPhone and to use the old iPhone, because he said, I don't need this because my son and my husband do everything for me. I don't need this smartphone.
Could I make a comment about the first question? If it's okay, I just about third and fourth age, it's sort of, the assumption is that it's a very sort of linear process, and you go through your third age and then you go through your fourth age in a very sort of straightforward, predictable manner. But in our field side, people make the distinction not based on third or fourth age, but based on, you know, how relevant age is for them in their life versus frailty. So frailty was the thing that people tend to focus on and worry about, but that wasn't necessarily linked to at what moment they were, whether they were turning 70 or 80 or whatever. It was, you know, as long as I'm healthy, then I'm feeling vibrant and age isn't really important. If, however, I feel frail or if I have illness issues, then my quality of life will change. But lots of people said that can happen at any time. People might not like to drive, you know, at night, and that might happen at any age. You know, it can happen whether you're relatively young or relatively older. So the issue of frailty was the way that our informants tended to compartmentalize. And it really challenges a kind of neat third, fourth age set of assumptions, I think.
Okay, thanks, Pauline. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time. So we've had a fantastic set of presentations and amazing discussion. There's lots of questions in the chat. I'm sure the team would be totally happy to answer those questions after this seminar's finished. But I know some of them have already been answered in the chat as well. So download the chat before this meeting finishes, and you've got some of the answers there. So really, to finish, I'd just like to say, but thank you to all of the presenters for such a really interesting work that you've been doing, to Danny for the project itself and for pulling it, you know, all together, and for suggesting this launch, and oh, sorry, I thought we'd finish. And to Georgiana, who's really done a lot to make this event work kind of technically and help with the organization of it. And thank you also to the audience and all your fantastic questions. I'm super excited myself to read these first 3 books to come out of the project and to see the rest of the research as it's published. Danny, do you want to say anything?
No, only to thank you, Hannah, for excellent hosting and preparing of the actual launch itself. And yes, we hope this is the start of a dialogue, that any of you who've been here, who want to kind of correspond later on, develop these projects in your own ways, as I'm sure many of you will. Academia should be a dialogue. We are continuing to learn ourselves, and we welcome comments, questions, criticisms, and extensions into the future. So thanks everyone for coming. Hope to hear from you again.
Thank you. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.